There comes a moment in every life when the world feels heavier than the strength we think we have. A moment when uncertainty knocks the wind out of us, when the future looks blurred, when giving up looks easier than standing tall. But history has never been shaped by those who quit when things got hard. It has been shaped by those who held on to a stubborn, unreasonable, unshakable belief that tomorrow could be better, even when today gave them every reason to doubt it. Undying optimism is not blind hope. It is engineered hope. It is the discipline of choosing possibility over fear, responsibility over resignation, action over excuses. It is the quiet fire that refuses to go out, even in the winds of chaos. And if there was ever a time the world needed people who choose to light the way, it is now. Not tomorrow, not someday. Now. The future belongs to the optimists who don't just believe in change. They insist on it. Optimism is a revolutionary act because it refuses to accept that the current state of things is the limit of what's possible. Men, especially, are often taught to measure themselves by control, certainty, and outcomes. So when life becomes unpredictable or overwhelming, the instinct is to shut down, withdraw, or pretend everything is fine. But the real revolution begins when a man chooses to believe that something better can be built, even when he cannot yet see the blueprint. This belief is not naive, it is strategic. It is the inner shift from surviving to creating. Optimism becomes radical when men allow themselves to be vulnerable enough to imagine a future they don't yet have the strength to build. Women often see this long before men do. Where men may feel pressure to carry the world alone, women tend to recognize that hope grows faster when it's shared. From a woman's perspective, optimism in a man is not weakness, it is courage. It signals that he is willing to rise again, that he still sees possibility where others see dead ends, that he refuses to be defined by the weight he carries. Optimism transforms relationships because it changes the way men interpret struggle. Instead of seeing challenges as failures, they begin to view them as training grounds. Women often watch men battle silently, believing they must protect others from their internal storms. But the shift happens when men decide that optimism is not pretending to be unbreakable. It's choosing to rebuild even after being broken. This mindset allows women to support them, not rescue them, and creates a partnership built on shared strength instead of silent suffering. Optimism reshapes identity when men stop asking, "What if it doesn't work?" and start asking, "What if I grow through this?" This single mental pivot is revolutionary because it reframes setbacks as opportunities for expansion rather than evidence of inadequacy. Women often admire this transformation deeply because it reveals a man who is grounded enough to feel, brave enough to learn, and bold enough to keep moving. Optimism becomes a force for change when men recognize that their belief in what could be is more powerful than their fear of what has been. Women see this belief not as a fantasy but as a leadership trait, a signal that a man is guided by vision rather than circumstance. It's in these moments that optimism stops being an emotion and becomes a responsibility. The responsibility to show up stronger, kinder, and more intentional than to challenges that try to break them. Hope isn't passive. It's a responsibility because waiting for life to improve has never changed anything. Men are often conditioned to believe that hope is something soft, something optional, something sentimental. But real hope demands action. It demands that a man show up even when he's tired, uncertain, or afraid. It requires him to take ownership of his direction rather than simply reacting to whatever life hands him. Hope becomes a responsibility the moment he realizes that others are counting on him to believe in a future that doesn't exist yet. Hope becomes powerful when men understand that carrying it is not about pretending everything is fine, but about refusing to let circumstances define their worth. Women often notice this distinction before men do. They see the difference between a man who avoids his struggles and a man who stands in the middle of them still, choosing to believe that things can get better. From a woman's perspective, this kind of hope is strength, not the loud kind, but the steady kind that makes her feel safe, supported, and respected. It is the sign of a man who doesn't run from difficulty, but refuses to be trapped by it. Hope becomes active when a man stops treating it as a wish and starts treating it as work. The work is internal first. It is the discipline of choosing a better narrative when the darker one is easier. Men often carry an invisible pressure to fix everything immediately, and when they can't, hopelessness feels like the only honest response. But the responsibility of hope is understanding that progress builds slowly, and that showing up consistently is more important than having all the answers. Women tend to appreciate this shift deeply because it shows a man who is committed to growth rather than perfection. Hope becomes leadership when men realize that their attitude sets the emotional tone for everyone around them. Families feel it. Partners feel it. Children feel it. Women often look at the way a man carries hope as a reflection of how he will handle the storms ahead. When he treats hope as a responsibility, he becomes someone who inspires steadiness instead of fear, direction instead of confusion. He becomes a source of clarity in moments when everything else feels uncertain. Hope becomes transformative when men accept that believing in a better future is not about optimism alone, but about accountability. It's about choosing to take the next step, even when the path is unclear, because someone has to move first. Women respect this deeply because it reflects a man who acts not only for himself, but for the people who trust him to keep going. The future bows to those who believe first, because every breakthrough begins long before there is proof. Men often wait for certainty before taking a step, as if confidence must come from guarantees rather than conviction. Yet the individuals who shape their own path are the ones who dare to believe while everything still looks uncertain. They commit to a direction before the world affirms it. From the outside, belief may seem simple, but for a man, it is an act of defiance against fear, doubt, and the instinct to avoid risk. Belief becomes powerful when a man understands that the future doesn't reward hesitation, it rewards courage. Women often observe how men wrestle internally with the pressure to appear strong, decisive, or unshaken, even when they feel lost. But belief is not the absence of insecurity, it is the choice to move forward despite it. From a woman's perspective, there is something deeply compelling about a man who believes before he succeeds, because it shows vision, grounding, and emotional maturity. It signals a man who leads with intention rather than impulse. Belief becomes transformative when a man stops waiting for permission to trust his potential. Men often hold themselves back because they fear being judged for failing, judged for dreaming too boldly, or judged for wanting more than the world expects of them. But the future bends toward those who dare to choose possibility over comfort. Women frequently recognize the spark in men who believe before results appear. They see a man who refuses to limit himself to the life he has and instead reaches for the life he could build. This kind of belief inspires partnership rather than pressure. Belief becomes a catalyst for growth when a man realizes that progress accelerates the moment he stops doubting his worth. Men often try to outrun their insecurities by working harder, moving faster, or staying silent about what scares them. But the shift happens when they believe that they are capable of more, not because they've earned it yet, but because they are willing to pursue it. Women respond to this shift with admiration, not because he is perfect, but because he is authentic, driven, and emotionally present. Belief becomes destiny when men accept that the future mirrors their internal story. The narrative they choose, whether rooted in fear or rooted in possibility, determines the life they create. Women can see instantly when a man has stepped into belief rather than waiting for certainty, because his energy, his decisions, and his presence begin to align with who he could become rather than who he has been. Courage is what optimism looks like in action, because believing in a better future means nothing if a man isn't willing to move toward it. Men often carry an internal battle between what they hope for and what they fear, and courage becomes the bridge between the two. It is not loud, dramatic, or heroic in the cinematic sense. It is the quiet decision to take one more step when uncertainty whispers that it's safer to stand still. This is where optimism becomes practical, where belief stops being an idea and starts becoming behavior. Courage becomes meaningful when men recognize that every act of bravery is rooted in vulnerability. Many men are taught to hide doubt, suppress emotion, and bury anything that looks like hesitation. But courage requires the opposite. It requires acknowledging fear without letting fear dictate direction. Women often see this distinction clearly. They can sense when a man is acting out of avoidance versus when he is acting out of purpose. To a woman, a man who embraces his vulnerability doesn't appear weak, he appears trustworthy, grounded, and human. Courage becomes visible when a man chooses progress over pride. Men often equate strength with doing everything alone, refusing help, or forcing a solution even when everything inside of them is exhausted. But true courage is recognizing when support is needed and having the humility to accept it. Women understand this well because they often witness the emotional cost of men trying to carry everything in silence. When a man chooses connection instead of isolation, he's acting from courage, not dependency. Courage becomes transformative when men stop waiting to feel ready and start acting with the readiness they have. Men frequently believe that courage requires full confidence, yet courage actually requires motion in the absence of it. It demands that a man take the risk of not being perfect, not having every answer, not knowing where every step will lead. Women often admire this kind of courage deeply because it shows a man who values growth over ego, evolution over image. Courage becomes the embodiment of optimism. When a man allows the future, he envisions to influence the decisions he makes today. Men who live this way prove that optimism is not a passive statement. It is a discipline. It is the willingness to confront obstacles with clarity rather than fear and to keep moving forward even when progress feels invisible. Women recognize this as a profound sign of emotional strength because a man who takes courageous action is a man who refuses to let fear silence the possibility of something better. Light the match. Lead even when it's dark because leadership is tested not when everything is clear, but when uncertainty blinds everyone else. Men often feel the weight of expectation more intensely during these moments, believing they must appear strong, composed, and unshaken even when they're filled with doubt. But lighting the match is not about having all the answers. It's about refusing to let fear dictate the atmosphere. It's about being the one who dares to create clarity. Thank you when everyone else is waiting for someone else to go first. Light the match with intention, because men frequently underestimate how much their presence influences the emotional tone of the people around them. Women observe this closely. They can feel when a man is silently wrestling with his fears, and they can also feel when he chooses to rise above them. To a woman, a man who lights the match in the dark doesn't need to be fearless. He simply needs to be willing. This willingness communicates steadiness, trust, and direction in a moment when everything feels uncertain. It's not about ego. It's about contributing light. Light the match despite the pressure, because men often assume that leading means being perfect. They hold back, thinking they're not ready, not strong enough, or not smart enough to guide anyone. But leadership in darkness is rarely polished. It's raw, it's messy, it's the courage to take one small step so others can take theirs. Women often admire this kind of leadership because it reflects authenticity over performance. She sees a man who doesn't pretend to be invincible, but who refuses to be paralyzed by what he doesn't know. Light the match by embracing vulnerability, because true leadership begins with emotional honesty. Men sometimes believe that revealing fear or uncertainty will make them look weak, but the opposite is true. A man who acknowledges his fear but moves anyway embodies strength that others can trust. Women see this form of leadership as deeply attractive, not because it is loud, but because it is real. It tells her that he is not hiding behind an identity. He is showing up fully human and fully present. Light the match even when the darkness feels overwhelming, because the smallest spark can change the entire direction of a moment. Men often underestimate the impact of simple actions: speaking up, offering reassurance, making a decision, taking responsibility. Yet these small actions can shift an environment from panic to possibility. Women witness this shift with clarity. They feel the atmosphere change when a man decides to be the source of calm rather than the source of chaos. It signals emotional strength, steadiness, and the kind of leadership that builds trust naturally. Light the match with consistency, because leadership is not a single heroic gesture. It's the discipline of showing up repeatedly when conditions are unclear. Men who lead this way prove that optimism is not an abstract feeling, but a lived practice. Women recognize this as a mark of a man who is grounded, dependable, and emotionally intentional. It shows that he is not waiting for the world to brighten. He is willing to create the first light himself. Protect your spark or lose your direction, because every man carries an inner fire that guides the way he thinks, leads, loves, and shows up in the world. That spark is the source of his creativity, his confidence, his purpose, and his hope. But life has a way of trying to smother it through pressure, failure, criticism, or exhaustion. Men often don't realize how quietly their spark dims. It's not lost in one moment, it fades slowly through years of carrying burdens alone, suppressing emotions, or believing they must endure everything without complaint. When the spark fades, direction fades with it, and a man can find himself drifting through life without clarity or passion. Protect your spark by understanding how easily it can be drained by the roles men believe they must play. Many men measure their worth by how much they can endure, provide, or solve. They push themselves until burnout becomes normal, until numbness becomes familiar. From a woman's perspective, this slow dimming is painful to watch. She sees the man trying to be everything for everyone while neglecting the part of himself that needs rest, expression, and emotional safety. She doesn't want him to carry the world alone. She wants him to stay connected to the fire that makes him alive, intentional, and present. Protect your spark by recognizing that isolation is one of the greatest threats to a man's sense of direction. Men often retreat into silence when they're overwhelmed, assuming it's their responsibility to manage struggle privately. But silence is where the spark suffocates. Women often wish men understood how much connection restores warmth, clarity, and energy. She doesn't want him to be invulnerable. She wants him to be reachable. A spark grows brighter when it is shared, not hidden. Protect your spark by setting boundaries with pressures that drain your inner strength. Men frequently feel compelled to say yes to everything, to be the rock, the provider, the protector, the fixer. But being everything comes at the cost of becoming nothing to yourself. Women can feel when a man is lost. Himself to endless responsibility. She respects him more, not less, when he protects his spark by choosing rest, reflection, or self-care. To her, this is not selfishness, it is sustainability. It ensures he remains the kind of man who leads with clarity instead of exhaustion. Protect your spark by staying connected to what gives you meaning, because purpose is the oxygen of a man's emotional life. Men who abandon purpose lose passion. Men who lose passion lose stability. And men who lose stability drift into lives that feel smaller than what they were made for. Women sense this shift immediately. She can feel when he's operating from obligation instead of inspiration. What she hopes for is not perfection, but a man anchored in something that lights him up, a dream, a mission, a value, a path. Protect your spark by embracing the habits that keep your direction alive. Men often underestimate the power of simple acts, a moment of solitude, a conversation that restores them, a goal that excites them, a discipline that keeps them grounded. These small decisions keep the spark from fading. Women notice these habits and admire the self-awareness behind them. She sees a man who honors his purpose enough to protect it, who values himself enough to preserve what makes him strong, grounded, and clear.